For a last presentation of the day, we welcome Joe Sims, co-chair of our party. Joe will speak on the connections between anti-imperialism abroad and the struggles waged here in the United States. We are super thankful for your support, and you now have the floor, comrade.
Good afternoon, comrades. I am so happy to be here, and greetings to all of you, and especially to our fraternal parties and those who have joined us from abroad. We hope everybody is staying strong and safe and staying in the fight, because, well, I don't have to tell you, we got some big battles ahead. Speaking of big battles, comrades, I will inform you of something that you might not know about, and that is that just over a week ago, our party celebrated 103 years of struggle, our 103rd birthday. Can you imagine? And it has been quite a century, if you think about it. This party has witnessed the October Revolution, 2 world wars, the birth of the CIO, the defeat of colonialism, and the death of legal Jim Crow in our country, which I'm proud to say we helped put in his grave. We've lived through 2 Red Scares, the Civil Rights Revolution, and were able to see Nelson Mandela walk free. In these years, we watched with anguish the collapse of the Soviet Union, but also with tears of joy, Cuba's liberation, Vietnam's triumph, and Venezuela's ongoing transformation. And I ain't even started talking about China. We are also well aware, comrades, that these were 100 years in which US imperialism declared the American century, the era when the US ruling class would shape a new world order that led to the disorder of the Cold War and US intervention in nearly every corner of the globe. And do I need to remind you this afternoon that this was made possible by the largest and most expensive military buildup in history? Last year alone, the defense budget topped nearly $800 billion. But the costs, folks, are nearly incalculable, not only measured materially in the millions of lives lost in military interventions or in the destruction of the environment, but also in the loss of intangibles like hope and trust and a belief in equality, and most recently, in the loss of a woman's right to have control over her own body. You know, it was Martin Luther King Jr. who years ago, in his famous speech at Riverside Church, opposing the war in Vietnam, who said, and I quote, "The security we seek in foreign adventures we lose in decaying cities." Martin said, "The bombs dropped in Vietnam explode here at home. They destroy hope and the possibilities for a decent America," end of quote. And you know what? Martin was right. It's happened over and again. In the 70s, the Pershing missiles with nuclear tips placed in Europe while steel towns shut down in Ohio. In the 90s, with Black Hawk helicopters going down in Somalia, while NAFTA closed down jobs in Michigan. And in the 2000s, when instead of searching Sodom for weapons of mass destruction, they should have been searching Wall Street for weapons of mass deception that they used to rob Black and Latino homeowners in that subprime ripoff. while them boys almost brought down the world economy. In fact, we still haven't recovered from it. And it continues today. The US ruling class, as has been pointed out by many other speakers this afternoon, has not given up its designs for an American century. But achieving it is a much more difficult proposition. While US imperialism is in many respects still dominant, it faces stiff competition from other imperialist centers in the European Union, Japan, Russia, Middle East, and other places around the world. Our planet's multipolarity is growing. And of course, China's ascendance has everybody taken another look. In these circumstances, global problems like climate change and new ones like COVID abound. But despite their severity, imperialism seems intent on using the same old bullying tactics and attempts to dictate terms. The Trump administration targeted China, seemed to curry favor with Russia, rattled Europe while attempting to isolate Cuba and overthrow Venezuela. And many have asked, why, while promising a change, the Biden policy seems a not so faint echo, in fact, in some ways it's worse, of Trump's, particularly with respect to China. And notwithstanding their denials, a Cold War 2.0 is in the making. This Cold War thinking, however, was pointedly challenged by progressive forces before the Ukraine war started. Citing the urgency of climate change, 33 environmental organizations challenged the Biden administration to end the trade wars and the attempt to isolate China, reach out, seek an agreement on global warming. Bernie Sanders joined with them. A few months later, before that, half of the Democratic caucus in the US House voted against what proved to be a successful GOP blue dog effort to increase the defense budget over and above what Biden initially asked for, which was way too much anyway. But Russia's invasion of Ukraine changed everything, at least for the moment, and a ruling class consensus seems to have emerged. But the question for us is, how deep does that consensus lie, and by what means can it be shaken? And this requires, we think, a long, hard, and objective look at the balance of forces in the country and where the greatest pressure can be brought to bear to affect it. The big question, in our view, is how in these circumstances can a peace movement be built and along what lines? We want to defeat imperialism, we've got to build a massive, and I mean massive, movement for peace. What are the circumstances? Well, for one, the fascist danger, while set back 2 years ago, has not receded. There's a slow-moving coup taking place in states across the country with the aim of suppressing the vote, and if that don't work, overruling it. The majority faction in the Republican Party now takes the position that they will not accept losing an election, period, end of story, and that therefore anything goes, including taking up arms to prevent it from happening. On the other hand, the Democrats, while now correctly characterizing the magma danger, also equate all who stand up to US imperialism with the same authoritarian brush. What do we do? Is it plague on both your houses? Do we stand aside from that struggle? Or do we get busy and by our mass work, fight to create conditions in which we are able to move developments in a better direction? To put it another way, under what circumstances will we be in a better position to build a mass movement for peace? Will it be under the rule of that fascist movement that has just outlawed abortion, now threatens to overturn gay marriage, that denies climate change, now threatens to pardon the January 6th insurrectionists? Or will it be with the People's Front that, with all of its inconsistencies, half measures, hesitation, reversals at some time, supports choice, voting rights, union rights, and being allowed to marry who you love? But what about the almost identical foreign policy, you ask? And you have a point. But to address it, comrades, let's draw a lesson from history. Let's remember what happened with Martin. Remember that speech I quoted earlier? He was murdered a year later. But before he died on the picket line, supporting striking sanitation workers in Memphis, he taught us an invaluable lesson. You see, Martin understood that the African-American people needed allies, even inconsistent ones. The equation back then was pretty clear. The GOP opposed civil rights, so did the Dixiecrats, but a section of the Dems supported ending segregation. All of them, let's remember, supported the war in Vietnam. But Martin and others set themselves the task of building a movement that isolated the GOP, shamed the Dixiecrats, and made some switch sides. The result was the Civil Rights Revolution. It was a big democratic breakthrough, but that was just the beginning. Martin then turned his attention to questions of war and peace, and he started to leverage that democratic breakthrough to the cause for peace in Vietnam. Oh, it was tough going. In fact, all hell broke loose. Important sections of the civil rights movement, BALT, NAACP, Urban League, others, Martin, you can't go messing around in international affairs. The newspapers, rained insult and infamy at him. But Martin had a notion, and the movement that he helped lead for democracy and civil rights joined hands with those opposing the war. Martin was murdered, but the writing was already on the wall, mainly because the Vietnamese won the war on the battlefield, but the US peace movement, given greater impetus by the leadership of Dr. King, played no small role. A year later, in 1969, Nixon began withdrawing troops, and in 73, Madame Bien arrived in Paris, heading the Vietnamese delegation, and the Paris Peace Treaty was signed. I want to suggest this afternoon that the situation before us today is similar. The magma fascist-minded GOP opposes civil rights, abortion rights, marriage equality. Some of the Dems are wavering, others understand the stakes, but like in Vietnam days, most of them support a rotten imperialist foreign policy. But just as Martin and his coalition needed a broader allies back then, so too do we need them today. We must, in the Communist Party's opinion, continue to build a mass movement around democratic and class questions that isolates the GOP, neutralizes those wavering, and win important democratic victories in the next Congress. And in that way, build the leverage, like Martin taught us, from these democratic breakthroughs that can advance the cause for peace. But to do so, we got to do more than vote. We've also got to overcome the crisis of inaction that has gripped this country since the last election. That means we got to strike. We got to register to vote. We got to rally. We got to protest. We got to occupy. And we've got to be creative in our tactics. In New York, for example, our comrades are going to set a picket line at the offices of those corporations who contributed to the campaigns of the over 130 Republican fascist members of the House of Representatives who supported the coup. And we've also got to start running our own candidates. I keep saying it. But right now, the deadline is November. Now, I know some of us are not going to want to get tainted by getting involved in electoral work this fall for fear that it's going to leave a bad taste in our mouths. I understand that. I don't like the taste either. But I also know that those who hold back completely because of that bad taste of things are likely to fail. Comrades, this is capitalism. And under capitalism, bourgeois politics ain't pure. In fact, it's downright dirty. But know this, we are fighting fascism, not your garden variety conservatism. We want expanded democratic and worker rights. We want peace. We want a woman's right to choose. We want LGBTQ rights. We want a clean and healthy planet. But to move forward, we have to shove aside the threat of fascism. And you got to be in it to win it. So let's unite in the fight against fascist imperialism. In fact, let's unite in the fight to fight neoliberal and all forms of imperialism. Let's open up space for a democratic breakthrough. Let's build the People's Front for a new anti-fascist, anti-sexist, pro-working class majority. And on that basis, a new tomorrow. And let's build this party in the process. So solidarity forever. Greetings to all of you. Let's keep on keeping on. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Comrade Sims. We open the floor for one last Q&A. So please remember to submit your questions to the Zoom box. The first question we have is, how involved is our party in running our own candidates in local and state elections as of right now?
That's to me. Well, not involved enough, not nearly enough. Our political action commission has set up a special committee to begin working on it. We ran one campaign or two campaigns this year. We have heard from a few other comrades around the country that they are planning to run. Of course, we do have elected officials in other places around the country, here and there and so on. But this effort, you know, we are overcoming, a 30-year suspending of our fielding of candidacies. And it's going to take some time to get up to steam. Just like, you know, with our YCL, you know, it was suspended about 15 years ago, and our convention took steps to refound the YCL. And now the YCL is breaking out and busting loose all over the country. New York, Connecticut, DC, Minnesota, Illinois, California, Washington, so on and so forth. And if I didn't name you, forgive me. And we hope that many of our young comrades will help take the lead in running those candidates. So it's a good question, and the honest answer is that we're just beginning. but we're pledged to continue to fight on it and continue to push. And if any of y'all listening want to run, let us know. And we will help at the national office make it happen.